Imagine you found your dream home. You can already picture yourself living there, but there's one problem. Both the listing agent and the seller won't consider your offer because you're not pre-approved. In today's housing market, this difference can be the one step in you getting the keys or watching someone else move in. In this video, we're gonna walk you exactly why the pre-approval process is crucial and the first step that every serious buyer should take. We're also gonna talk about how it boosts your buying power, as well as exactly what goes into the process. By the end of the video, you'll know everything that you need to know to be confident, prepared, and ready to make a winning offer. Getting pre-approved sets you up for success right from the start. Not only does it tell you exactly how much home you can afford to purchase, but it also strengthens your offer and speeds up the home buying process. So if you're ready to make your dream home a reality, make sure you stay tuned and learn how to get the edge that you need in today's competitive housing market. So what exactly is a pre-approval? A pre-approval is basically a lender's conditional commitment to offer a mortgage up to a specific amount. So you're probably asking, well, what does that actually mean in layman terms? It basically means that a lender has analyzed all of your documentation, your income, your credit score, your job history, all of that information. They've looked at your debt to income ratio and they've come out and told you this is exactly how much home that you can buy based on all of that criteria. Now, with that said, I want to take a minute here and differentiate what a pre-approval is versus a pre-qualification, because sometimes those words are swapped in for one another when in fact they're two different things entirely. A pre-qualification is essentially having a conversation with someone about your income, about your credit score, about your job history, about all of those things, but not supplying any documentation behind it, not filling out a loan application, not doing any of that stuff. That's essentially a pre-qualification. Whereas a pre-approval is that you are doing all of those things, but you're backing it up with documentation. So say I Google mortgage broker and the first person that comes up, I call them and I have a conversation, and based on that conversation, they say, hey, Jeb, you're pre-approved to buy a house up to $1 million based on everything that you just told me. Well, something that's very, very important to understand. That pre-qualification, that conversation you just had, holds absolutely no weight at the end of the day. And that's because they haven't done the due diligence to actually verify all of the information that you've told them. Now, all of the information that you told them could have been true, but what I'll tell you is more often than not, it's not that straightforward. And that's exactly why you want to make sure you're going through the full pre-approval process by providing documentation just to make sure everything they're telling you is accurate. And that's because it can come back to bite you at the end of the day. I can give you story after story of people that have told me that they were ready to go, ready to purchase a home one way or another, and come to find out after finding the home and then going back to the lender and providing the documentation, they don't actually even qualify to buy a home. That's why it's very, very important to start the process by not only having that conversation, but by having someone analyze that documentation just to make sure you're ready to go. Now with that, I think it's very, very important that prior to having that conversation with a lender, that you actually take the time and set a budget on your side. And the reason I say that is because a lot of people make the mistake of going into the pre-approval process and allowing the lender to tell them how much home they can afford. And the reality is the lender doesn't know how much you can afford. Only you know how much you can afford. So my recommendation to you before you start that process is take the time and create a budget. Write down all of your expenses. Yes, I'm talking about everything. What you spend on groceries, what you spend on childcare, what you spend going to the gym, date night, buying coffee, smoothies, all of those things. Go back and analyze your bank statements over the last couple of months to get an idea of how much you spend. And from there, determine how much you're comfortable paying on a monthly mortgage prior to ever having that conversation. Now, you're probably watching this going, Jeb, yeah, that's exactly what you should do. But here's the reality. That's not how most people do it. Instead, they call their lender, hey lender, here's all of my documentation. How much home can I afford to purchase? And the lender says, well, based on the information here, you can buy a home up to $500,000. And then you say, yeah, that's great. And then you go out and start shopping for $500,000 home because that's what the lender told you could qualify for. Now, maybe you've taken a look at the mortgage payment and you said, yeah, you're comfortable with that. But if you haven't actually done a budget, I would tell you to stop, take the time and do a budget prior to having that conversation. And the reason for that is because housing payments can get more expensive over time. Not only are you likely to see insurance costs go up, you're likely to see your property taxes rise over years, and there's always the chance that you might have some maintenance items, things on the house that need to be addressed. And the last thing you want to do is be house poor. So by starting the process with a realistic budget, you're going to put yourself in the best position possible. And by doing that pre-approval process up front, it's going to speed up the process once your offer actually gets accepted. And that's because the lender's already done all the hard work. They've looked at your credit score. They've looked at your income documentation. They've essentially already underwritten the files. So they probably only need a couple of updated documents once your offer gets accepted to get everything moving forward. So the more work you put into the pre-approval process up front, the easier it's going to be on the backside. Now, one of the questions that often comes up when talking about pre-approval is, how soon should I do a pre-approval? And my answer is always the same: as soon as you can actually do it. And I'm saying that even if you don't plan on buying a house for 6 months, a year from now, do the pre-approval process now so that you know exactly where you stand. Because if there's things in there that you need to work on, like your credit score, maybe you need to save more money for a down payment, or if you have plans to change something with your work history or do something differently, you know exactly how that's going to impact you in the future. So the earlier you can get the pre-approval process done, the better the position you're going to be in once it actually comes time to pull the trigger. And with that, a pre-approval process shouldn't really cost you any money. So you shouldn't be paying somebody to be pre-approved. It should be a free process where somebody goes through all of this and helps you work on getting to where you need to be. Now, if you're a first-time home buyer and you're finding any value in my content at all, do me a favor and hit that thumbs up. And if you want to stay updated on everything mortgage and real estate related to help you become an expert in the process, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. So you're probably watching going, yeah, Jeb, I got it. Now, what's actually involved in the pre-approval process? What actually happens? Well, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but this is essentially where you're going to fill out an application. You're going to tell them, you know, all of your personal information, your name, your address, your social security number, your date of birth, where you live, where you work, all of that information. And they're going to take that along with some other disclosures that you're going to have to sign, and they're going to pull your credit history. Now, once they have your credit history and all of the other documentation that's required, your income documentation, which usually consists of W-2s if you're an employee. If you're self-employed, then you're going to have to provide full tax returns. Along with that, you're going to have to provide asset account statements, so bank statements, IRAs, 401ks, any sort of support and documentation showing where the down payment might be coming from or where your additional funds are going to sit. Any sort of asset information is going to be provided. Once they have all of this information, they're essentially going to analyze it. And from there, they're going to determine your debt to income ratio, which is essentially the key component that a lender looks at when determining exactly how much home you can afford to purchase. Now, one of the things that often comes up is not wanting to have your credit run because you've heard that it's going to impact your credit score in a negative way. And the answer is, yeah, it could, but not if you do it correctly. And the reason I say that is because there's a right way and a wrong way to have your credit pulled. Now, if you're 6 months out, you can have a lender do a soft pull on your credit report where it essentially doesn't impact your score at all. But if you're within a couple of months of buying a home, then it's worth it to have the hard credit pull. But here's the thing. You essentially have 45 days from the time that your credit was first pulled for a mortgage to get other quotes from other lenders, to shop around, to talk to other people where it's not going to impact your credit score. Now, outside of that 45-day window, if you run it again, then you're going to have multiple inquiries that could impact your credit score in a negative way. But if you're only having one lender run it and you're not getting inquiries from a lot of different places, it shouldn't have a negative impact on your score. But here's what I will say. If you have lower credit scores, that inquiry is likely to have a bigger impact than someone with higher credit scores. So if you know your credit score isn't that great, then maybe you have a conversation with the lender about your credit score prior to having it run. But if you're someone that knows you have great credit, you pay your bills on time, you've seen your credit score, you know, in your credit card on the Vantage score or whatever, and you know it's good, then it's probably less of a concern. So we've talked about submitting documentation and the lender reviewing it, but one thing we didn't touch on is how do you actually choose a lender? I would ask you not to go to Google and type in how to find the best lender, because what you're going to get is a bunch of paid ads, and typically you're getting the biggest companies out there that are putting the most marketing dollars behind that showing up at the top. And in my opinion and experience, that doesn't typically translate into the best mortgage rates and or the best experience. You should instead start with a referral. Find someone that had a good experience, someone that you know, like, and trust that's been through the process that can refer you to their person. But even with that said, if you don't know where to start, my team and I would love the opportunity to help. In fact, we've helped hundreds of people on YouTube. So if we could be of service to you to help you through that pre-approval process, do me a favor and check that link below. But regardless of which direction you choose to go, just make sure they're reputable, check their Google reviews, make sure they have experience in the business and they're not just a fly-by-night person switching jobs trying to make money, that they're there to actually guide you through the process and that they have your best interest in mind. Now that we've talked about the pre-approval process and what it is, I want to talk about a couple of key things that you absolutely need to know. A pre-approval is not a guarantee for the bank to lend you money, because any changes in your credit score, any changes in your employment, those all can impact the final approval. But what I will say in my experience is when you go through a knowledgeable, reputable broker and you've been pre-approved, as long as they've done their work and you're buying a property within what you've been pre-approved for, you shouldn't really have any issues, assuming nothing on your end has changed. But here's a true story. We actually had a client who got pre-approved about a year and a half ago, got into the pre-approval process, got pre-approved, found a house, went into contract, and halfway through escrow, they quit their job with the idea that the pre-approval had already been completed and that she no longer needed that job, which created a big issue because now she no longer had employment. Now for this particular borrower, fortunately, she was able to go out and find another job and we were able to piece the whole thing together. But just remember, just because you've been pre-approved doesn't mean it's a final deal. Nothing in this business is done until it's done. At the same time, pre-approvals don't really have an expiration date. You'll hear a lot of people out there say that this pre-approval is only good for 90 days. Well, typically speaking, your pre-approval is good as long as the information that you provided initially is good. As long as that stuff hasn't changed, then essentially your pre-approval hasn't changed. I also want to add that it's important to know who you're going to move forward with prior to getting your offer accepted, if possible, right? It's okay to shop around, try to find the right lender that you want to move forward with. Don't shop for the lowest rate, because when you shop for the lowest rate, you're going to set yourself up for failure, right? Lowest rate is a piece, or good rate is a piece, but just make sure you're getting a knowledgeable broker in the process. But at the same time, have an idea of who you're ready to move forward with if your offer gets accepted. What I see a lot is people waiting until their offer gets accepted and then they start trying to shop around, trying to go find a new lender. And by doing that, they're actually wasting days in the contract that are probably necessary in order to get that closing done on time. So the earlier you can shop around and find the mortgage professional that you want to move forward with, the better off you're going to be. On top of that, I want to talk about some common mistakes to avoid. The first one being changing jobs in the middle of the process. Don't go out and change jobs without having a conversation with your lender. And that's because that job change could impact the validity of your pre-approval process. Typically speaking, if you're going from a wage earner job to a wage earner job, you're probably good as long as you're staying in the same line of work with a similar salary, all of that. But what you absolutely want to avoid is going from a wage earner job and going self-employed, unless you have a history of it. If you don't have a history of it, you're probably going to kill your deal. So prior to making any changes during the pre-approval process, have that conversation with your lender. And that also goes for things on your credit. If you're going to get a new car, if you're going to apply for furniture loans or a new loan or something else, make sure you run that by your mortgage professional prior to doing it, because by doing it, it could impact your debt to income ratio, which in turn could impact how much home you can actually afford to purchase. And the last mistake I want to mention is skipping the pre-approval process altogether. This video is about getting pre-approved, why it's important. Don't think that you know your situation so well that you don't need to go through that process. This process should only take a couple of hours at most of your time. It's taking the time to do the loan application, taking the time to send in the documentation, and then the rest falls on the lender. And sometimes that lender can get back to you same day and tell you whether or not you're pre-approved, and sometimes it may take a day or two, depending on how complex your situation is. But by skipping it entirely, you could end up losing your dream home.